Hello, and welcome to another episode of the B2B Leadership Podcast. My name is Nils Vinje, and today my guest is Tony Fisher. Tony, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
I'm excited to be here with you, Tony. Thanks so much for joining me. Before we get started and dig into your background, would you please share with me and this audience the role that you're in today and the company that you work for?
Absolutely. So I'm the VP of Support and Customer Success at Centercode. Centercode, basically, we provide a SaaS platform for early release or pre-release product testing. Basically, we consider perfected the beta test into what we consider the delta test by decades of test kitchen and kind of getting things all put together and proven. Then we basically built a platform around that exact process. So
Hmm.
gets you up to speed really fast on producing producing a project to test a product, including bringing in testers, collecting feedback, getting that data together, dashboarding, getting reports out, the whole shebang. So
Wow, that's pretty cool. All right, so what do you mean you've perfected the beta test? What does that mean?
So, I mean, as you know, throughout the years, we basically provided a service and also the platform that was more sandbox oriented, and then we had a bunch of tools. You can kind of use them however you wanted. We had best practices around what you would want to do, but over the years, we've been sort of proving out the best processes and things that were most effective through the research and just having that service organization on our side. And so through that process, we basically established key procedures, key processes, key components of testing that we've been able to sort of prove out and bake into the platform itself.
Hmm.
So it's simplified, it's practically automatic in a lot of ways, and it's a consistent process that because the platform supports it directly, it makes it really easy to drop things in and get consistent results that way.
That's pretty cool. It's interesting how you combined the tool and the platform with the process. That's something you don't see terribly often, especially in the CS world. You often have a tool and then you have a process, and they don't always live together. What did it really take, just conceptually at a high level, to bake in a process into the tool and have them live together?
Yeah, it was a very long process, and it's one of those things that as you go through again, we provided it was more sandboxy, more toolboxy. So I think that's like you mentioned, that's the way a lot of platforms are today. In that most businesses have their own process, they have their own expectations, their own needs, and so providers usually provide, hey, here's the tool set all in one big bucket, right?
Right.
Um, we did that for a long, long time, but it really did take a sort of a mental stop point where we said, okay, we need to really dedicate to building what we've proven to be effective. Now we still have all the sandboxing options and all that kind of stuff in there,
Yep.
but we've been able to basically transition into taking the things that were the most effective individual processes and then supporting them through specific UI elements or specific components. But to your point, it was a very big mental shift. And it actually was part of a rally to effectively, I guess, standardize or sort of carve out a real component of the industry in that space because everyone has always been doing it exactly however they wanted, which was there's marketing betas, there's alpha betas, there's dog fooding betas. These are all people call beta. There's like hundreds of different terms.
Yep.
So being able to actually say this is the right way to do it, we've proven that it's the right way to do it. Of course, everyone has a little flexibility here and there, but this process is consistently excellent results and all that kind of stuff. So we decided to give it a name, and we named it the next iteration. So Delta.
That's cool. Yeah, that's fantastic. I was going to ask you what did Delta mean, but now we get it. It's the next evolution. That's really fascinating, and just to see, one, how long it takes to really refine a process, but then two, to integrate it into the solution. That is no small feat. So that's a really interesting approach, and I imagine it has huge implications from a customer success point of view too, because now you're not just worrying about enabling people on the platform. You have a huge added hand that the process is already integrated into there. So does that make your CS life and job any easier?
Mm, right now, we're in the point where yes, it will eventually, but
Hmm.
right now it's relatively fresh. So we still have the majority of our customers are still sort of making the transition from their homebrew
Yeah.
solution into this. So it's in the, I guess you could consider it the more turbulent part of the success journey right now, in
Hmm.
converting existing customers in their old ways into seeing the light, so to speak.
Yep.
But again, obviously, you have the folks that you still want them to get the good results that they're expecting, that they need, their value. And so you try and do your best to kind of get that. And anyone who can kind of see any of these benefits and kind of get the efficiencies and things like that, we want to help find those individual things. So it's
Hmm.
definitely a lot of, there's some cherry picking going on right now, but eventually at the
Yeah.
point, it's like they kind of tip over the scale and eventually say, oh, you know what? Okay, let's try it this way. And then they finally see that
Yeah.
it's, that process works out. So it's
Cool. A little bit
turbulent
of the
now, but
messy
it's going to get
middle.
better. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
turbulent
Exactly.
now, but it's gonna get better. That's
Exactly.
awesome. Love it. Very cool. Fascinating stuff and, really insightful on what can happen in the future. Like when you have deep domain expertise, deep experience with customers, and your product can become the solution, not just, in a tool, but in the process integration too. So that's super cool. Very
Absolutely.
interesting.
Yep.
All right. So let's shift gears and let's talk about how did you get into your first leadership position?
Man. All right. So as far as my leadership experience and how I got into this position, so to be completely honest, Centercode is effectively my first real leadership position. And for transparency, I worked at Centercode for over 10 years now, and I came out of service industry. I worked at, as everyone else has, worked at Starbucks for a number of years through
Yep.
college. And I mean, technically, I had, a supervisor position there, but it was really just, it wasn't quite the same as what we're talking about today. So
Yeah.
the leadership position that I am in now and sort of grew into over those 10 years, it was really more of an organic growth into this space. There were definitely some milestones hit where we hit a certain threshold. As okay, well, there's a title related to this now, and those
Hmm.
kinds of things. There's a name for it, but growing into and kind of establishing and getting this position was definitely a labor of love, labor of passion, and driving for results that I wanted in my neck of the woods, so to speak. I started in support, and so I just basically pushed for the most effective support and the best customer experience and those kinds of things. And eventually, the wake behind me became people and
Hmm.
procedures and kind
Hmm.
of defining things about things, and it just sort of shaped into being more departmentally shaped and kind of started getting that leadership I guess, footprint
Hmm.
over time.
Okay, so super interesting. One, you've been at Centercode for 10 years, and
Mhm.
this was, first job that you had outside of school and outside of Starbucks and whatnot. And interesting, great experiences there, but totally
Mhm.
different world. And I liked what you said. There was a very organic growth into this place. There was nobody, your CEO, saying, "Okay, well, here's what you have to do to become VP of CS, or here's what you have to do to become director, or here's blah blah blah."
Mhm.
Tell us more about that organic growth and what are some of the key principles and things that you kept in mind that kept you pushing, get into a job. Oftentimes, being there for 10 years doesn't happen all that often these days. So, what were some of the things that helped you get through those times and that you relied on that you knew was just the right thing to do and ultimately led you to this place of being VP?
Absolutely. So I think one of the big things, again, early on, it was around, I had, I guess, a lot of room to grow, which was really helpful. Center Code was about 10 years old at that point, and so we were still kind of small businessy. We were sort of still a startup mentality sort of kind of shape to where there was a lot of, wearing of many hats. And so what really ended up happening was I was actively looking for the hats that I needed to wear or that I could wear that would help get me more domain knowledge and more understanding of the customer space and just kind of taking ownership. It's not that I didn't have like a trust for my colleagues and the folks in other departments around me. I absolutely did, but I'm the kind of person who I want to take ownership of the things that I'm
Mhm.
responsible for, and I viewed myself as effectively owning the customer experience, the customer support experience.
Mm.
Um, and so, with that sort of drive, I was always looking for ways to make my job more efficient, more effective, and get a
Mhm.
little bit deeper. And, you know, a lot of times people see the wearing of many hats as like picking up different roles or different responsibilities from different roles. That's definitely the case in a lot of ways. But there was also, there's direct support. Well, how can I bring in more angles of direct support? Is it chat support, email support, phone call support?
Mhm. Mhm.
Eventually that grew into finding standard tooling for that kind of thing and finding efficiencies. And then as the customer base grew, I needed some help managing all of that. So then I
Mhm.
got some help and I was responsible for effectively getting that person up to speed and training that person. And so now I was suddenly in a place where I was a manager of an individual. It wasn't
Yep.
quite so formal at that point, but it was still the kind of thing where I was responsible for their success as well. So then I had to
Hmm.
pass on the knowledge, and now I have formalized knowledge. Internal, it just that's kind of the organic over time just
Yeah.
builds into being a thing, you know?
That's really interesting, and that's perfect description of what organic from a leadership growth and development perspective can look like and can mean in an environment like that. But the key driver that I heard you say there was that it was one of ownership. You took ownership of making whatever it was you were doing, whether it was support, whether it was the customer's experience, whether it was the support experience. You took complete ownership of that which you were responsible for, and then looked for all the different ways to, one, get it started, and then two, make it better and find efficiencies, and then three, bring in a team, and four, all of a sudden, down the line, you're leading this team of individuals who are running an efficient system. Is that a
Yeah,
fair assessment?
absolutely, yeah. And as it grows, you start finding these like forks in the road where things kind of split off, being a little bit different here and there. That's where I got the introduction into customer success as
Mm-hmm.
driving customer support and training and knowledge and enablement. Success is an obvious sort of like, wait, okay, how do I maintain this? How do I be more proactive about it? And then that forked into being okay, now support and success. And there's these two avenues that are a little bit different, reactive and proactive, but yeah, and it is sort of that more organic growth into taking ownership of certain experiences and certain components of the job. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Um, the many wearing many hats, and I like how you differentiated between not just the role that you're playing, but also the I guess, how would you say it, the slice of the role that you're playing, like the
Yeah.
different angle or something like that.
Yeah.
Typically, we'd think of hats as, I'm CS hat, and I'm finance hat, and I'm ops hat, and I'm a support hat and whatnot. But those are big, gigantic categories. So give us a little bit more detail on the slicing of the hats as you look at support, as you look at CS. And when you think about wearing multiple hats, how granular of a level of detail are you actually going down to as you think about what could make this better?
Yeah. I think with regards to kind of the different slices and kind of I guess they're like smaller hats, like little ones. Maybe it's more of a deeper hat. They turn into top hats that were very tall. I don't know,
Okay,
but
that's fair.
sure.
We'll go with the top hats.
Top
I
hats
like
then.
top hats.
Yeah. So yeah, like kind of getting into the depth of things, you start trying to find again more of taking that ownership and being responsible for that side of the experience or the role or the job. There are always aspects that you kind of learn as you go, friction points, challenges, those kinds of things that come up that aren't on the straight and narrow. They aren't on the main path,
Yeah.
right? So there may be things that you discover or you think about or you're kind of instructed toward by resources that you read about or articles that you see or things like that. Or they could be things that you personally experience or you hear from directly from a customer, right? And those could be everything from speaking of the support side of things specifically, we've got direct chat support, right? They're talking to you, customers
Mhm.
talking to you about an issue. There are so many aspects to just the concept of chat support that could kind of have you pulling in responsibilities all over the place, right? Like, how do you take
Yeah.
an issue that you collect from chat support into engineering? How do you decide or determine what is the original intent or the design intent behind a specific thing to whether or not it's a bug or an improvement or things like that, right? So defining those avenues, defining that stuff, that's an aspect that it borrows from those other departments, but it's still your hat, right? It's still just
Yeah.
enriching your
Yeah.
responsibility. So those are
Hmm.
like that. Just as a small example, is kind of the things that every kind of component as you're viewing these things and trying to do basically just do a better job overall, searching for
Yeah.
all the options in all the ways that you can. It lets you dig into those things and say, okay, well, how do I make this more effective? How do I make this
Yeah.
more efficient? And I think that comes with both the ownership side of it and also having a passion for the customer or just whatever role you're in, right? Having a passion for whatever you're doing
Yeah.
makes you really seek out how to really get the polish on it, how to make, ownership of it, be proud of what you're doing.
Hmm. So with that angle and that lens and kind of looking at it from that hat perspective, is it ever possible to be done?
No, honestly, no.
I had a feeling you were going to say that, but I was curious because, sometimes we think, okay, we've gotten this to the place where it needs to be for support as a whole or for chat as a whole. And it's just like this giant blanket. Okay, that's fine. I'm just going to put that on the side now and I'm going to go focus on something else. But the reality, as you just described it, which I really like, is going down to much more granular level of detail, that all the interaction points, all the connections to other systems, all the flow of information, all the connection of people, all the servicing of that one chat message, right,
Mm-hmm.
actually is an infinite number of things to tweak and to refine and to enhance to make it more efficient overall. And so now this leads me to the question of, if you look at each of the areas that you're responsible for from that level of depth, could probably be a little overwhelming given the fact that any of these areas, one chat message could yield a whole bunch of different opportunities. So how do you prioritize where to spend your time and where to focus on what to make more efficient when literally anything could be made more efficient?
Yeah. So I think there's sort of two aspects to it. One is definitely prioritization, right? Like you mentioned, and how to do that. I'll touch on just a second. But the other aspect of it that I think is really important is you're never done,
Mm-hmm.
but eventually you get to the point where you just have to hand off.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've got members of my team where I'm constantly looking for those efficiencies and for ways to make things better in that regard. But I've also kind of pushed responsibility down. And so again, really that organic growth, right? That's where I'm getting sort of the middle management side of things, or
Yeah.
or not necessarily, but like role responsibilities. So um, I'm not done. They're not done. And
Yep.
eventually whoever they, the segment or the small piece, that's how, organizations get bigger, right? Is by kind of extending further. So that aspect of it is definitely a huge component. That said, with regards to, I'm sorry, I lost track of
The
the first part of that.
prioritization, coming back to the
Yes.
prioritization piece. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. There are definitely components of timeline.
Mm-hmm.
There are definitely components of interaction with other teams,
Mm-hmm.
which is definitely something that'll kind of push priority. And with everyone, in a silo, you can say, "Oh, this is what most of my customers have issue with," or "This is where I think our weakest points are in enablement and onboarding," or
Yeah.
those kinds of things. But you're always going to be sort of influenced by the company position,
Yeah.
and then your organizational goals are going to be pushing you in certain directions as well. So getting all those factors together and sort of feeling out where you can make the most ground at any point in time
Mm-hmm.
without losing the work list, basically, right? So for right now, I might be focusing really hard on updating our onboarding resources and our onboarding products because I have the mental attention of the product team and the training team.
Yeah.
So I can push that, but that doesn't mean that I'm at all forgetting that I need to make more efficient processes with engineering, but they're busy right now.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a large factor of like, it's office, not politics isn't the term at all, but it's basically like kind of finding out where you can make your mark, where you can
Yeah.
get your impact is definitely a major factor.
Cool. And if you're aligned with those teams and perhaps work that they're doing during those times, then, all the more power to both of you to come together and solve those problems at that point in time.
Absolutely. Yeah. You can actually ride their waves sometimes if they're
Yeah.
getting more focus or whatnot. Yeah, absolutely
Right.
something that happens
And
too.
helping them will ultimately help you in the long run. So we all win. Cool.
Yep.
All right. So when you did bring on other members and now all of a sudden you're in a leadership position with new team members, you talked about the training aspect. It makes total sense. So how did you go about transitioning from, you were literally the only person doing all the work to now there was a team and team members who are there to do the work? And that's a big shift, both mentally and just tactically. How did you navigate that transition from IC to leader?
I think one of the biggest things, or one of the things that helped me get to that transition and make that happen was understanding what my requirements or personal requirements, or what those kind of KPIs, what those metrics were that I was responsible for, and also what I was pushing for. Identifying which ones were reasonable to basically pass on to and kind of require of others, and
Okay.
which ones I was responsible for outside of my organization as well.
Okay.
And basically make those things that anyone else doing this role should also be responsible for.
Mm-hmm.
And really,
Mm-hmm.
it's just basically giving that definition so that you have a role definition you can hold someone else
Yeah.
accountable for as well, as long as you enable them and give them the tools and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So I had my tools, I passed on my tools, we shared them, we got into the thing, and we both met. This is when I brought on one other person really early on in the way. We both met the same goals,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
eventually it grew into being, okay, we'll bring on another person. They have the same expectations.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, I have enough bandwidth over there now that I can break away from that and focus much more on working on the business instead of in the business.
Mm-hmm.
Make a clean break. Say, okay, I'm going to be keeping an eye on it and
Yep.
helping out wherever I can.
Yep.
I still close every one of my meetings with my team members. If there's anything I can do to help you guys out, let me know.
Got it.
And it's still very much my philosophy of like having that general support.
Yep.
But that sort of growing the sort of foundational requirements of what you do and then stepping away from it and keeping an eye on it, right? Because you've got those
Mm-hmm.
metrics, you've got those KPIs, so you can do that. I'm very much a hands-on. I mean, obviously because of this kind of organic growth aspect of it, I do the thing first to understand how to kind of get there, and then
Yeah.
kind of build out foundations and pass it on. So with everything that we've done as far as knowledge base to training resources to general chat support to any of our customer success stuff, all that stuff are all things that I've had my hands in, so I
Mm-hmm.
understand them and I know what to expect. And then I
Mm-hmm.
can kind of pass those responsibilities on, and they're fair. And at the same time, I know where the gaps are, where the challenges are, and things like that.
So what do you find in situations where you pass that on? You've been it, you've been there, you've done it. You pass that on, and the individual who takes it on certainly executes against that. But then they have maybe a totally different perspective on how to approach this. I imagine that may have come up once or twice. What happens in that case? Because you were actually the one to create it in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. This is one of those lessons getting up there is a little bit of humility.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, when you have that kind of ownership and you have that sort of passion toward that aspect of it, it's a lot of times you're really pushing for what you have as in your vision, right? And so there's absolutely a point in time where they're like, well, this is the right way. And you have to think about it. You know what? Actually, that's a good point. There are a lot of times when like I've had to kind of back off a little bit because I thought I had all the information, and then you don't. You just have to recognize that you don't always have the information that you
Yeah.
expect to have or think you have, and be able to go from there. So yeah, there have definitely been conversation points where sit down either one on one or in a group setting, depending on what's appropriate. But you got to give an honest listen and
Mm-hmm.
kind of genuinely consider what you have and what they have, and find out if there's something that you were missing or if they actually do have the right path forward. And sometimes that stuff boils up to even to my leadership as
Yeah.
well. Like
Yeah.
they brought something up, I was wrong about something. They had a great point, great idea. And one of the things that we do consistently and is a really nice thing is we celebrate wins a lot we have like Slack channel for wins and things like that.
Nice.
And so those are kinds of cases, and individual recognition points for like the virtues and things like that of Centercode. And one of them is curiosity. One of them is virtuous, so it's basically digging into something and finding out and kind of learning. And then
Mm-hmm.
virtuous is basically taking ownership and honesty, those kinds of things. Where if you make a mistake, own up to it and say, look,
Mm-hmm.
I made a mistake. There was a problem here. We're seeking a solution. But those kinds of things and celebrating those kinds of things it helps with that humility aspect
Yeah.
of it. And it helps with being able to say, they had a good idea. I'm boiling that up to my leadership as well. And realistically, like you mentioned before, if we're working together on this, everybody wins.
Yeah.
So really, like if I was wrong about something and I made some mistakes, someone else brought something up, whether they're a direct for me or there's someone else. I mean, the rising tide, is it raises all ships or
Yep.
what?
Yep.
Anyway, rising tide, all of
Yeah.
it. So the company's better in the long run, and that's what's most important.
That's great points. I'm glad you brought up the core values because next question was going to be around, well, how do you foster an environment where people feel comfortable to bring up those kinds of things when they are handed this thing from the person who actually created it? Sometimes
Yeah.
that can be a little bit off-putting depending on level and tenure and comfort level and just personality. Like it may not always be the easiest thing to do. So curiosity is one, virtuous is another. And how do you we said that you celebrate the wins, which is great, but tell me more about how the company as a whole embodies these core values and how they end up facilitating or helping you build that kind of environment where it's fine for people to push back or bring new ideas to the table.
Absolutely. So one of the things that stands out is our Slack channels. I mean, because everything's remote now, especially Slack channels are. There's a lot of group channels and company-wide channels. So we have just the Centercode overall channel that obviously everyone is in and has kind of posts and things like that. CEO posted in there just as well as the new hire that got brought in. Whenever anyone new starts, there's a big welcome to the team kind of thing. Birthdays are celebrated in that channel, that kind of thing. So it's a very communicative channels. We've also got smaller niche channels and things like that, like the California channel, because we have folks that are in
Hmm.
Utah or Georgia, or I'm in Washington. So
Nice.
Centercode North is also a channel. There's a
Okay.
good handful of us in the Pacific Northwest. So, but basically, collaborative channels is one thing. Kind of keeping lines of communication open and consistent, and the intermingling of leadership
Hmm.
and that every employee basically has equal voice in the space.
Yeah.
That's a big part of it for sure. We
That's
also do. So good.
Oh no, that's huge. Just
Mhm.
the space that's there, and just the openness from day one, as you were saying, the brand new person, and I'm sure there's a lot of encouragement to get active in that channel. And yes, the CEO is in there too, and that's great. That's a good thing.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we also do all hands meetings where um, pretty much every all hands that we've had has had some aspect of give us your feedback on the things that we've been talking about. And
Hmm.
we have specific feedback forms and things like that you can throw in. They can be anonymous if you want, or you can throw in it can be named. We also have just a lot of collaborative stuff that we try and do. We have company party things, even in the remote side of things, Christmas parties and things like that. We've done remote Christmas parties where we basically kind of pull everybody together, and we do a lot of activities. We send out kind of gift packages and things like that to people that have you know uh, gingerbread house building things. So that's one of the activities we do all together. So just a lot of that kind of stuff of just being able to interact with each other in a very collaborative, but also a friendly and inviting kind of space is a big
Nice.
part of it for sure.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's great. And it takes everybody, the rising tide again, right? It takes your
Hmm.
CEO, it takes your leadership, it takes you, it takes your team. Um, and I imagine that everybody wants to be part of that because everybody is part of that.
Exactly.
Right? It kind of the culture builds on itself once the foundation is laid. But it's, in the early days, you joined when it was about 10 years old. Was that culture in place from the point at which you joined, or has that had been an evolution and organic too?
A little bit of both, I think. It's definitely grown into being a stronger foundation. It is a concrete foundation at this point because we got all this stuff. But
Yeah.
realistically, I mean, the I first met CEO and CTO playing video games.
Hmm.
So I was playing games. We didn't know each other at all. We played games together for probably 2 years, maybe a little less than 2 years, before I actually got the offer to join the team. So I was already very familiar with them on that level.
Yeah.
But in meeting everyone else in the organization, and all the other leadership team members and all that kind of stuff, it was still a very similar atmosphere where we're very open.
Hmm.
Whether it be for jokes or for criticism or anything like that, where we say, okay, this is something that needs to change or whatnot. Um, it was definitely a very collaborative, and
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it was necessarily. I mean, realistically, it was fun. It wasn't like focused specifically on fun, but like we had ping pong tables and we
Yeah.
had the kind of thing, right? Like,
Hmm.
so we've done our best to kind of maintain that connection to the roots, so to speak, but and kind of keep that attitude and that atmosphere. But obviously, as you grow up, as you get more formalized in your organization and things like that,
Yeah.
you put channels to things and things
Hmm.
get more formal.
Hmm.
But regardless, we try to keep those channels as lively and positive as we can.
Yeah, and it's always fun to hear about the culture and where it came from. And usually, I mean, especially in the earlier stages and startup and the growth phase, it comes directly from the founders and for example. But as you mature and as you progress, then there is an evolution that has to take place, and part of that is formalizing what this culture that happened, just as a result of the people, actually means. And that's that act
Mhm.
of getting to curiosity virtuous, if you have others, whatever they additional ones are. But
Mhm.
that's really cool because that, I mean, it shows taking a big step and saying, well, let's be clear about what this really means, because we have more people now, and we got to communicate our message in a way that doesn't just involve the founders communicating it directly to every single person, because they could.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not just we're not just hiring friends or people we've known for a long time and all that stuff. We're
Right.
getting people right from all over the place, and so kind of setting that as a core aspect of their onboarding and learning about the company and the organization,
Hmm.
making sure that they're aware that those are things that are just as much as we value high performance and all those kinds of things out of an individual contributor, we also want to make sure that they are comfortable and that they have a clear vision on all of these aspects of the organization as well, because we want that to live for as long as Centercode's alive.
Yeah,
We want it to be that kind of organization. So
that's
you
great.
got to keep it alive.
And it's clear, and you documented it. You wrote it down.
Hmm.
You know what it is. So therefore, it
Exactly.
can live on forever in whatever capacity you like. That's awesome.
Yep.
All right, Tony, last question here. If you could go back in time, knowing everything you know today, to when you've got the very beginning, let's just talk about from the very beginning of your Centercode journey, and you could sit down with your younger self and have a conversation and share some advice. What advice would you share with your younger self?
Oh man, with my younger self specifically, and I mean, really, this applies to a lot of folks out there. Um, Confidence.
Mm,
I mean, I already had the passion for it. I already had the drive. I already had the want of ownership to kind of take this thing and run with it, right? But a lot of times I slowed myself down,
mm,
or I had missteps,
mm-hmm,
or there were opportunities that maybe didn't pass by necessarily, but I just didn't see them. So I
mm-hmm.
didn't let them pass. I just didn't know that they were there because I didn't think about, or I didn't have the confidence to really say, look, this is something we need to do,
Yeah.
or even have the confidence to say I need to do research into this thing to better back my position, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to, oh well, they know what they're doing, it's fine. They do know what they're doing, but like you said, as you get more and more knowledge and more domain experience, that broadens the things you have to know, and therefore you can't be quite as deep.
Yeah.
So being, in my spot and where you are, having that deep knowledge is extremely valuable, and good leadership recognizes that.
Yep.
So being able to speak up, being willing to speak up, being willing to kind of put my 2 cents in there would have been very valuable for accelerating the process, while also avoiding some of the missteps I've made along the way.
Yeah, awesome. Wonderful advice, Tony. Thank you so much for sharing your background, your expertise, your leadership journey. Love the organic growth that you talked us through, and how you got from joining a company 10 years ago to being the VP, and the many hats that you wear and the different degree of hats. That was a new angle that I had never thought of. And was thinking hats were hats, but we got tall hats, we got short hats, we got ball caps, we got beanies, we got all kinds of hats. And now I'm going to look at
All
them in a
kinds of
whole
stuff.
different way.
Yep, absolutely, man. Absolutely.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much for spending some time, and take care, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.